A hymn older than most written languages, signs not of god or kings, but beer. In ancient summer, the goddess Nicasia was immortalized in song, part prayer, part brewing recipe, inscribed around 1800 BC on clay tablets. This recipe song wasn't just poetic. It spelled out how to brew a life-sustaining staple, more vital than water or bread. Beer wasn't just a quirky ritual, it was nutrition, hydration, and a daily safety net for millions. So before you get comfortable, think about this. While philosophers wrote and kings ruled, an ordinary drink was quietly holding society together. But where did this story actually begin? Step into the Fertile Crescent some 12,000 years ago. The land stretches wide, dotted with wild grasses and promise of something new. People here are used to moving, chasing herds, gathering seeds, never staying long. But now something's shifting. The land grows stingy, game is harder to find, and the old ways aren't enough. The answer isn't just about survival. It's about what happens when a little accident changes everything. Picture a clay pot left out in the open, filled with leftover grain and rainwater. Sun beats down, wild yeast drifts in, days pass, and the contents bubble and sour. Someone takes a sip, maybe out of desperation, maybe by mistake, and finds a cloudy, tangy, slightly intoxicating drink. This proto beer is nothing like what you'd find in modern bar. It's thick, it's gritty, and just strong enough to make a hard day seem lighter. This isn't just a new taste, it's a new reason to gather. Anthropologist Solomon Katz argued early farmers may have pursued cereals to secure steady beer supplies. That flips the usual story. Instead of planting wheat and barley just for bread, people might have settled down to keep the proto-beer coming. Imagine the appeal. A drink that's safer than most water, loaded with calories, and let's be honest, a lot more fun than plain old porridge. Beer wasn't just about getting by. It pulled people together, making the hard work for farming worth it. The old tale says agriculture started for bread, but that's only half the truth. Bread filled stomachs, but beer did something else. It turned strangers into neighbors, gave people a reason to stay in one place, and made celebrations possible. One simple drink brought comfort, nutrition, and a way to forget life's daily grind. Even just for a little while, in short, beer offered both survival and connection, and that might have tipped the scales. Early brewers used whatever local grains were on hand barley, emmer, even millet, quickly turning frost seeds into deliberate fields of grain. The shift from gathering to growing wasn't just about hunger. It was about wanting to keep the good stuff coming. People saw what happened when grain met water and time, and they wanted to control over that process. That meaning planting, tending, and eventually settling. The archaeological record backs this up. Pottery charts from the ancient Near East, dating back to up to 9,000 years, show traces of starch, fermentation byproducts, evidence of early brewing in places like Jihao in China and Selmans in the Levant. Researchers have found chemical signatures hinting at a primitive alcoholic drink. In Israel, stone mortars were used to grind grains for fermentation, pointing to tradition of brewing that predated written history. These weren't isolated accidents. They were a sign of a growing obsession. Beer's role in daily life went beyond novelty. It was practical. Water sources were often contaminated, but fermented drinks were safer to consume. Beer was dense with calories, a liquid meal that could sustain a person through lean times. For communities just learning to farm, it was a buffer against hunger and disease. The theory that beer motivated agriculture changes how we think about early humans. They weren't just scraping by, living hand to mouth. They were experimenting, creating, and searching for meaning in their everyday. Beer became a conscious choice, not just a lucky accident. It was a spark for innovation, a reason to build, and a foundation for community. Of course, not everyone buys this theory. Bread still has its fans. But when you look at the evidence, the grain chosen, the tools made, the settlement built near good brewing resources, it's clear beer was more than a side note. It may have been the main event. Food keeps you alive, but a shared drink creates a groove. And that's how society starts. So, what does all this mean for the story of civilization? Farming wasn't just practical fix for empty bellies, it was a cultural leap, driven as much by desire as by need. Their accidental beginning may have nudged humans toward bigger settlements, more complex social lives, and new ways of thinking. The Fertile Crescent became the stage for transformation, fields of grain rising where wild grasses once grew. With communities now settling to cultivate grains for beer, large-scale societies could emerge. Our next stop is ancient Summer. Step into ancient Summer, about 4,000 years ago. The city hums with daily life, brick homes swarming in the sun, traders calling out, children weaving through alleys, and temple workers holding offerings. In the middle of all this, beer stands out, not just as a drink, but as a backbone of Sumerian existence. For Sumerians, beer wasn't a luxury. It was food, payment, medicine, and maybe most surprisingly, a sacred connection to the gods. You can see just how deep this went if you look at one of humanity's oldest written texts, the Hymn to Nicaea, scratched into clay tablets around 1800 BCE. This hymn is more than a prayer to the goddess of beer. It's a brewing manual, line by line. The recipe calls for bapir, a special beer bread, hulled and malted grains, honey and even wine, all blended together and left to ferment. The Sumerians didn't just throw ingredients in a pot. They measured, mixed, and weighted, treating beer making as careful craft. The hymn itself is proof that beer was worth getting right, and worth celebrating. But why did beer get its own goddess? The Sumerians believed beer was a gift from Ninkasi, a divine present that bridged the gap between humans and gods. Brewing, pouring, and drinking beer became spiritual acts. Every time someone raised a cup, they were honoring Ninkasi. The hymn wasn't just a recipe, it was a ritual, a way to keep the sacred close in everyday life. Summer beer wasn't just about quenching thirst, it was about keeping the world in balance. Now, forget the idea of a frosty pint or a bottle cap. Sumerian beer was thick and cloudy, more like a meal than a drink, with grain floating on top and sediment lurking at the bottom. Archaeologists have found long straws, sometimes made from metal, sometimes reed, designed specifically for drinking from communal vats. Picture a group gathered around a big ceramic jar, each person sipping through a straw, talking, laughing, and sharing stories. This wasn't just about the beer, it was about the act of drinking together. Modern research confirms these straws really were used for communal beer, not just for show. The ritual of sharing a vat brought neighbors closer, turned strangers into friends, and made beer social glue. Beer didn't just build friendship, it built economies. In summer, beer was currency. Workers on temple projects, canal diggers, and laborers of all kinds were paid in beer and bread. Coins weren't a thing yet, but beer was as good as money. Imagine finishing a day's work and getting your wage in liquid bread, a drink dense with calories and nutrition, trusted more than the local water. Sumerian beer was so sustaining that it earned the nickname liquid bread. It filled stomachs and kept people going, especially when clean water was risky or food supplies ran low. The temples themselves were more than religious centers. They were the heart of Sumerian society, places for worship, yes, but also for business, administration, and community gatherings. Beer flowed freely in these spaces. It was poured out as offerings to the gods, shared among priests, and handed out to workers. The act of making beer, offering it, and drinking it together created a sense of unity and purpose. If beer was good enough for the gods, it was good enough for the people serving them. Artifacts back this up. Archaeologists have dug up pottery, drinking vessels, and even written recipes that shows just how important beer was. These finds aren't rare. They're everywhere, from homes to temples to workshops. Beer marked celebration, sealed business deals, and turned ordinary meals into events worth remembering. If people gathered, beer was almost always involved. So why did beer, out of all the foods and drinks, become so central and even divine? Part of the answer is practical. Water could be dangerous, carrying disease or dirt. Beer, thanks to fermentation, was safer. It also packed in calories and nutrition, making it a reliable food source. There is more to it than that. Beer's intoxicating effect changed how people felt. It loosened tongues, sparked creativity, and turned daily routines into moments worth savoring. The process of brewing, watching grains and water turn into something new, felt almost magical. It's easy to see why Sumerians gave thanks for it. Bread filled bells, but beer did something extra. It brought people together, gave them reason to celebrate, and made the ordinary feel special. Brewing wasn't just about survival, it was about hope, gratitude, and the sense that life could be more than just work and worry. When people drank beer in summer, they weren't just taking in calories. They were participating in tradition that connected them to their neighbors and their gods. This isn't just about nostalgia. The system built in summer, writing, trade, organized religion, shaped the ancient world. Beer played a role in all of them. It was the daily wage, the temple offering, the social bond. Without it, the rhythms of Sumerian life would have been looked at very different. So, if you picture Sumerian society, don't just think of cigarettes and cuneiform tablets. Think of groups gathered around a clay vat, straws in hand, sharing a drink that was food, payment, and prayer all at once. Beer was the thread that tied everything together: work, worship, and community. Next, we'll see how this divine brew powered the engineers behind Egypt's greatest monuments. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as a monument to human ambition, but its story is built on something far more ordinary than stone: beer. Imagine the scene: thousands of workers, not slaves but paid laborers as modern archaeology has shown. moving massive limestone blocks under the hot Egyptian sun. These were skilled artisans, masons, and engineers, supported by armies of seasonal workers who lived in sprawling labor camps. These camps were like small cities, complete with homes, bakeries, breweries, and even medical stations. Keeping this workforce fed and hydrated was a daily struggle, and the answer was simple: bread and beer. Beer wasn't a bonus or a treat at the end of a shift, it was the wage. Workers received daily rations of bread and up to 4 liters of beer. Yes, 4 liters, a figure documented in records from pyramid construction sites. This liquid bread was the backbone of their diet, paired with actual bread, and together they supplied nearly all the calories, hydration, and nutrition these workers needed to survive. It might sound repetitive, but for the people building these monuments, it was as essential as stone itself. Why beer and not water? The Nile, for all its importance, wasn't a reliable source of clean drinking water. Boiling grain killed harmful microbes, making beer safer than tainted river water. The brewing process turned risky water into a life-sustaining drink. Beer wasn't just about the taste or a quick buzz, it was preventive medicine, a calorie boost, and a practical necessity all in one. The alcohol content was low, but the drink was thick, cloudy, and packed with barley and grain residue. Each gulp delivered energy and nutrition, keeping workers going through back-breaking shifts. Picture raising a thick, barley-rich cup after a grueling day under the sun, a shared moment of relief and solidarity among workers. Beer was more than a substance. It was the glue that held workforces together. The ritual of lighting up for rations, drinking together, sharing in the same daily reward created a sense of community. In a life defined by hard labor and uncertainty, beer became a small comfort, a constant presence that made the relentless work a bit more bearable. The system that kept the pyramids rising depended on more than just the workers at the site. Fields of barley and emmer fed bakeries and breweries alike, forging an economic network that sustained pyramid projects. Farmers grew the grain, millers processed it, brewers turned it into beer, and bakers made the bread. Every cup of beer handed to a worker represented the combined effort of thousands across Egypt. The logistics of feeding and watering these workforces were as impressive as the construction itself. Without this network, the pyramids would remain nothing more than plans on papyrus. Beer also carried a weight that went beyond calories and hydration. Egyptians saw beer as a gift from the gods, a sacred drink tied to Hathor, the goddess of joy and fertility. Brewing wasn't just a job, it was responsibility. To brew beer was to participate in a tradition that connected the living with the divine. Even for the laborers, every ration was more than a meal. It was a blessing, a reminder that the work mattered in the eyes of the gods. This wasn't lost on the pharaohs. Paying workers with beer and bread wasn't just smart management. It was a way to keep the workforce healthy, motivated, and loyal. The daily beer ration was a transaction, a bond between ruler and builder. It was a system that kept the wheels turning, and it worked. The beer didn't just flow into camps, it flowed through the entire structure of society, linking the fields, the breweries, and the building sites together. If you step back and look at the big picture, beer is everywhere in this story. not in bottles or cans, but in heavy ceramic jugs, in the hands of tired workers, into fields of grain stretching along the Nile. Brewing was a craft, but it was also an industry, one that required planning, resources, and constant attention. The beer that fueled the pyramid project was as much product of Egyptian ingenuity as the pyramids themselves. Beer's role wasn't just practical or symbolic, it was emotional. For the people who built the pyramids, it was a daily ritual, a moment to pause and connect with others. It was a reward for effort, a comfort after hardship, and a reason to keep going. The simple act of sharing beer turned strangers into co-workers and co-workers into a community. In a world where life was often uncertain and hard, those moments mattered. This is what makes beer's story so compelling. It's not just a drink, it's a thread running through the lives of ordinary people and the ambitions of entire civilizations. The pyramid may have been built from stone, but they were held together by the hands and the cups of people fueled by beer. But even the strongest societies changed. Egypt's golden age faded, and new challenges swept across the world. As empires collapsed and chaos spread, the survival of beer didn't rest with kings or pharaohs. Instead, it found a new home in places of quiet devotion, where ancient recipes and brewing techniques were preserved against the odds. After Rome's collapse, Europe wasn't exactly a vacation spot. Cities emptied out, roads turned to mud, and the most people focused on just staying alive. But while the world outside fell apart, monasteries became quiet refuge for anyone or anything worth saving. Inside those thick stone walls, monks kept more than just religious texts safe. They preserved the basics of science, medicine, and yes, brewing. The truth, beer might not have survived the Middle Ages if it weren't for these silent, robed men with a knack for patience and record keeping. Monastic life revolved around work, prayer, and discipline. Brewing beer fit right in. In monasteries across what's now Germany and Belgium, monks turned brewing into a craft and a calling. They wrote down their recipes, tracked every step, and improved on what they had inherited. While the outside world lost touch with a lot of its past, monks were busy perfecting the future of beer. The craftful notes and willingness to experiment meant beer didn't just survive, it got better. One reason monastic beer mattered so much was simple. Water was dangerous. Wells and rivers were full of things you didn't want in your cup. Brewing required boiling, which killed off disease. Monks even brewed small beer, low alcoholic, nourishing brews children could safely drink. Beer was food, hydration, and safety all in one. In one time when most things could kill you, a mug of monastic beer was the closest you could get to insurance. By the 1100s, hops, valued for bitterness and preservation, became standard in monastic brews. Before that, beer was often sweet and spoiled quickly. Hops changed everything. The first mention of hop beer showed up in the 9th century France. But it was German monks who really ran with the idea. Hops didn't just keep beer fresh longer, they gave it a sharp, bitter edge and balanced out the sweetness of malt. Suddenly, you could store beer, ship it, and enjoy a more complex flavor. This wasn't just a minor tweak. It was the beginning of the beer most of us recognize today. The monks' improvement didn't stop with the hops. They refined every part of the brewing process. They adjusted grains and blends, experimented with yeast, and built better equipment. Brewing was slow, steady, and deliberate. Each batch was a lesson, and every mistake was recorded for the next monk to avoid. Monastic beer earned a reputation for quality and consistency. When people talked about honesty and purity, they pointed to what came out of the Abbey brewery. Picture a monk in a dim stone kitchen, sleeves rolled up, stirring a steaming copper kettle. Shelves behind him groan under the weight of a handwritten recipe book. The air smells of malt and yeast, and the only sound is the gentle bubbling of water. Brewing wasn't just a job for the newest recruit, it was a respectful task, passed down with pride. Each pint represented not just calories, but the faith and focus of its maker. Monastic brews served travelers, locals, and supported monastery finances. Pilgrims and wanderers found more than a bed and a prayer at the abbey gate. They got a sturdy meal and a safe drink. In a world where economies were fragile and famine was never far off, monasteries became a local anchor. The beer kept communities afloat, both nutritionally and economically. The monks sold what they didn't need, supporting their own work and helping the people around them ride out the hard times. For monks, brewing was more than just work. It was a way to serve God and neighbor at the same time. Every barrel was a mix of devotion, discipline, and a little bit of chemistry. Brewing became a spiritual practice, with monks seeing their effort as a form of service. They weren't aiming for profit or fame, they wanted to do the work well, to nourish the body and the soul. That attitude left a mark, shaping how people thought about beer long after the Middle Ages ended. Some of the world's most famous beers today, Shimmy, Westmalle, Orval, are direct descendants of this tradition. These Trappist ales are still brewed by monks, following rules that haven't changed much in centuries. The beer must be made within the monastery under monastic supervision, with profits supporting the abbey or local charities. The result is a beer that's more than just a drink. It's a piece of living history. Every sip connects you to the line of brewers stretching back to a time when the world outside the abbey's walls was full of uncertainty. Monks didn't just keep beer alive, they set the standard for what beer could be. Their innovation, written recipes, better equipment, the use of hops, laid the groundwork for everything that came after. They turned brewing into a science and an art, showing that even in the hardest time, patience and care could make something worth sharing. Next, beer's journey moves onto the high seas, where it would become a sailor's lifeline. You are standing on the deck of a wooden ship, somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. The wind stings your face, and the only thing between you and weeks of hunger, thirst, and sickness is a barrel of beer. Life at sea isn't a grand adventure, it's cramped, filthy, and dangerous. You eat salted meat, gnaw on biscuits hard enough to break teeth, and try not to think about the rats. The ocean stretches forever, and every day feels like a repeat of the last. But even here, beer is more than a comfort. It's your best bet for staying alive. Sailors faced a longer list of threats: storms, pirates, disease, but the real killer was often hidden in the water. Stored for weeks in wooden barrels, fresh water quickly turned foul, breeding bacteria and stinking up the whole. Beer, on the other hand, stayed drinkable. The brewing process spoiled away most germs, and the alcohol kept new ones from moving in. So while the water rotted, beer held up. Shipboard beer was still more palatable than brackish water, providing calories and safe hydration. It was the closest thing to a health plan most sailors had. Scurvy was the nightmare that haunted every voyage. Bleeding gums, swollen limbs, and slow, miserable death from lack of vitamin C. In the 17th century, doctors even brewed beer with scurvy-fighting herbs, a lifesaver on board. It wasn't perfect cure, but when lemons and oranges ran out, a pint of herbal beer could mean the difference between life and death. The daily beer ration became law. By law, British sailors received up to a gallon of beer a day, thanks to Samuel Pepys regulations. It wasn't a luxury or a treat, it was a routine, a right and a necessity. Picture the scene below deck at mealtime, a sailor with a wooden mug, grateful for his thick, flat beer. It didn't taste like much, but it filled him up, kept him hydrated, and dulled the edge of homesickness. Without it, the mystery of the voyage would have been almost unbearable. The daily ritual wasn't just about nutrition. It kept order. The promise of beer at the end of the shift gave sailor a reason to keep going, even when days blurred into each other. It was a small mercy in a world of hard labor and harder rules. Deny a sailor his ration, and you risked mutiny. Beer was the glue that held the crew together, a quiet agreement between captain and crew that things would be just a little bit easier, at least for a while. But the ocean is relentless. Beer that survived a week in the English Channel might not last the month-long slog to India. Heat, humidity, and constant jostling turned most beer sour or useless. That's when brewers back home got creative. To survive the months-long voyage to India, 18th century brewers hopped their beers heavily, birthing the India Pale Ale. Hops acted as a preservative, keeping beer fresh through tropic heat and rough seas. The result was a drink that could go the distance, bitter, strong, and still drinkable of the months in dark hold. IPA wasn't just a new style, it was a solution, custom built for the realities of the global trade. This wasn't just about beer, it was about solving problems. British brewers didn't set out to create a legend, they just wanted their beer to survive the trip. But in doing so, they changed what beer could be. Now, a barrel could leave London and arrive in Calcutta months later, still worth drinking. The IPA became a symbol of adaptation, proof that beer could meet the challenge of empire and exploration. Other nations caught on. Dutch, Scandinavian, and Spanish ships carried their own brews, each with tweaks suited to their routes and climates. Wherever European ships went, beer followed. Sometimes it was just to keep the sailors alive, other times it was the start of something bigger. Brewing tradition that took root in colonies, new recipes born from necessity, and global exchange of techniques and tastes. Beer on board wasn't just about the sailor, it shaped the world beyond the deck. Ships that carried beer also carried settlers, soldiers, and traders. When they landed, they brought brewers with them. In port cities and colonial outposts, breweries sprang up to supply the demand. Sometimes the beers changed, new grains, new climates, new water, but the core idea stayed the same. Beer was a constant, a taste of home in a place that felt like anything but. Even as ships grew faster and voyages grew shorter, beer kept its place. It was practical and familiar, and it adapted as the world changed. The story of beer at sea is a story of resilience, of a drink that refused to be left behind, even when the odds were against it. Sailors relied on it, brewers innovated for it, and entire empires depended on it, whether they realized it or not. By the end of the Age of Sail, beer had proven it could handle almost anything. Bad water, sickness, endless travel, and boredom of the open sea. It was a tool for survival, a reason to keep going, and a small comfort in a harsh world. The innovations born on the ocean, like hopped beer, didn't stay on ships. They made their way back home, changing what people expected from a pint and setting the stage for even bigger changes. On land, the Industrial Revolution would soon transform brewing once more. Let's talk about what happens when beer collides with science and industry. The late 1700s and 1800s weren't just about factories and smokestacks. They were about taking the old ways of brewing and putting them on rails, literally and figuratively. For centuries, brewing was slow and hands-on process. Monks and families did their best, but every batch was a gamble. Open vats meant every breeze could change the flavor. A hot summer could ruin months of work. Beer was local, unpredictable, and sometimes, frankly, a mess. Then came the machines. Steam engines and refrigeration machines enabled breweries to ferment with precision and ship lagers year round. Suddenly, you didn't have to pray for a cold cellar or hope the weather cooperated. You could make the same beer in January as you did in July, and you could make a lot more of it. This wasn't just about making things faster. It was about making beer consistent and available on a scale nobody has seen before. Beer wasn't stuck in one town anymore, and so could its reputation. Now picture the scene in 1842 in the Bohemian town of Pilsen. Local brewers were desperate for something better, something that didn't look or taste like the murky, heavy ales everyone was used to. Enter Joseph Grau. He brought in pale malts, used cool fermentation, and unveiled the world's first clear golden lager, the original Pilsner. The beer was bright, crisp, and clean, catching the sunlight in a way no beer ever had. People were hooked. In a world used to dark, cloudy brews, this was like switching from candlelight to electric bulbs overnight. Pilsner didn't stay local for long. With new bottling and shipping methods, it moved fast, across borders, across continents. Suddenly, everyone wanted that golden, sparkling drink. Breweries all over Europe tried to copy it. Most modern lagers trace their roots straight back to this moment. The clear, cold Pilsner became the new standard, and the idea of what beer could be shifted for the good. But while machines made beer bigger and brighter, science made it smarter. For most of history, brewers just hoped for the best. If a batch spoiled, they shrugged and started over. Nobody really knew why some beer turned out great and some went bad. Then in the mid-19th century, microbiology finally revealed yeast as a living agent of fermentation, allowing brewers to ensure purity and consistency. Louis Pasteur's research showed that yeast was not magic or accident. It was a living thing doing real work. He figured out that the other microbes, the ones you didn't want, were the reason beer spoiled. Pasteur's work meant breweries could finally control the process. They could keep out the bad stuff, grow the right yeast, and repeat success over and over. Imagine a steamy brewery hum where machines grind malt, while scientists measure yeast growth to guarantee each batch. The place smells sharp and sweet, Copper pipes snake along the walls, and the air is thick with steam and the sound of gears turning. In one corner, a brewer checks a thermometer. In another, someone peers at yeast under a microscope. This isn't just tradition anymore. It's innovation laid on top of centuries of trial and error. These sages didn't just make beer taste better. They made it possible for beer to be everywhere. Before you drank what the local brewer made, and that was that. Now you could walk into a bar in New York, Berlin, or Buenos Aires and order a cold, clear lager. Beer became democratic. It wasn't just for the lucky or the rich. Anyone could just grab a pint, whether they were in a city or a small town. You didn't need to know the brewer's name. The beer would taste the same batch after batch, year after year. Bottling and pasteurization made beer shelf-stable and easy to ship. Refrigerated rail cars and steamships took it further than ever. Breweries grew, some became household names, building empires on the promise of a cold, reliable drink. Beer ads popped up on billboards, in newspapers, and eventually on radio and TV. The drink that once belonged to a village now belonged to the world. But there was a catch. As beer became more industrial, it also became more uniform. Pilsner and pale lagers ruled the shelves. Brewing giants focused on efficiency and consistency, sometimes at the cost of flavor or variety. For many people, beer became predictable, something you could count on, but not something that surprised you. The same golden lager poured from taps everywhere, whether you were at a ball game or a backyard barbecue. Still, you can't overstate what this era meant. Beer went from local oddity to a global staple. Scientific breakthroughs meant fewer bad batches, fewer sick customers, and more people enjoying a safe, refreshing drink. Brewers had the tools to experiment, but also to scale up. The groundwork was laid for something bigger than anyone could have imagined a century before. These breakthroughs democratized beer, setting the stage for a modern mass brands, and eventually a homegrown pushback. Because by the time the 20th century rolled around, beer's story wasn't finished. The very thing that made it popular, consistency, clarity, and reach, would also spark a quiet rebellion. The next chapter isn't about machines or microscopes. It's about what happens when people get tired of the same old pint and start looking for something that tastes like home again. By the middle of the 20th century, beer had settled into a routine. Walk into a bar, a grocery store, or someone's backyard, and odds are you'll be handed a light lager. Budweiser and Heineken filled coolers and taps everywhere. And for a while, that was just how things were. These brands didn't just dominate shelves, they defined beer itself. Pale, fizzy, and if we're honest, a little dull. The big breweries wanted something everyone could drink. Nothing too bitter, nothing too weird. It worked. Beer sales boomed, and almost every bottle tasted like the last one. If you wanted variety, you were out of luck. But under the surface, not everyone was satisfied. By the 1880s, backyard brewers reignited interest in robust ales and revived ancient styles, from Belgian lambics to rich stouts. These homebrewers weren't looking to take on the giants at first. They just wanted a pint with real flavor. They dug up old recipes, tried out new hop varieties, and brought back grains no one had bothered with for decades. Some batches turned out strange, others were brilliant. But every experiment chipped away the idea that beer had to be bland. Friends and neighbors started noticing. Word spread. Soon these small personal projects turned into a movement. Small, independent breweries began popping up in towns and cities, each with its own approach. Some focused on resurrecting styles that had nearly vanished, like saisons, wild ales, or goose. Others leaned all the way into creativity, tossing in everything from coffee to fruit to smoked malts. The point wasn't to please everyone. It was to make beer that actually tasted like something. Sometimes bold, sometimes weird, always different from the big name lagers growed in the shelves. The moment grew, fueled by curiosity and a sense of possibility. Reed discovered IPAs, a fusion of tradition and innovation. Yum started a craft movement with their intense hop profiles. These beers weren't shy. They were sharp, bitter, and packed with citrus and pine flavors that cut through the sameness of the usual lager. The IPAs became a blank canvas. Brewers tweaked the grain bill, played with the yeast, and layered in the hops until each batch was its own thing. Someone went hazy and juicy, others doubled down on bitterness, and a few cranked up the alcohol for a puncher finish. Suddenly, beer drinkers had choices. You could chase a new flavor every week, and if you liked surprises, there was always something on a tap you hadn't seen before. But craft brewing wasn't just about the beer in your glass. It changed how people thought about beer entirely. Craft breweries became local gathering spots, turning beer into an art form celebrated in tap rooms and in festivals. You'd step into a small brewery and see walls lined with bottles, each with a label more creative than the last. Some looked like comic books, others like abstract paintings. The design was a part of the experience, a sign that this beer was different, made with intentions and a sense of fun. In these spaces, beer became more than a drink. It was a conversation starter, a reason to meet your neighbors, an excuse to linger for another round. Breweries hosted trivia nights, live music, or just let people hang out with a board game and a pint. The tap room wasn't just a bar, it was a community hub. Beer festivals took this further, drawing crowds eager to try new releases or rare styles. At these events, you could wander from booth to booth, sampling everything from tart sours to chocolate stouts, all while talking to the people who brewed them. Beer pairing dinner became a thing too, with chefs and brewers teaming up to match complex flavors in ways that made you rethink what a pint could do alongside dinner. The craft beer revolution also revived the sense that beer could and should reflect the place it's made. Brewers starting using local ingredients, from wild yeast to regional fruits and spices. Some went back to basics, fermenting in wooden barrels or open vats, chasing the flavors that defined beer centuries ago. Others looked forward, experimenting with new grains, hops no one had heard of, or even infusing beer with tea, herbs, or chili peppers. The result was a range of flavors and style that made beer exciting again. No two breweries were the same, and that was the point. What's striking is how quickly this movement spread. What started with few homebrewers in the US turned into a worldwide shift. Today there are over 40,000 breweries globally. In every country you'll find small independent outfits making beer their own way. In Japan you might find a matcha-infused ale. In Scandinavia, farmhouse brewers are reviving styles that had nearly disappeared. In South America, brewers experimented with native grains or wild fermentation. The diversity is staggering, still growing. Craft beer also helped people rediscover the social side of drinking. A pint wasn't just something to wash down your dinner, it was a way to connect. Whatever you were at a crowded festival, a quiet tap room, or just sharing a bottle at home, the beer was a reason to gather. Each new style, each experimental batch was a chance to try something new and talk about it with someone else. That sense of discovery, of sharing, is what made craft beer more than just a trend. Of course, not every experiment is a winner. You find beers that push boundaries a little too far, or flavors that just doesn't work. But that's the part of the fun. The point isn't perfection, it's possibility. Craft beers brought back the idea that beer could be surprising, that it could make you pause and pay attention. It's a reminder that even something as old as beer can keep evolving. From those simple Sumerian straws to today's frothy pints, craft beer is another chapter in humanity's age-old tale of fermentation and fellowship. The story isn't just about what's in your glass, it's about the people, the places, and the moments that come together around beer. And as you look at the range of choices on tap today, it's clear that beer's journey is far from over. What's left is to step back and see the bigger picture, how this humble drink has shaped and been shaped by the people who brew and enjoy it. Here is the thing. Beer has always been more than something you pour into a glass. From forgotten posts in ancient villages and the bustling taprooms of today, it's been a steady companion through every era. Whether it fueled the building of pyramids, kept monks healthy and behind monastery walls, or sparked a new wave of creativity in craft breweries, beer has quietly connected people, sustained communities, and marked everything from daily routine to major celebrations. Every time you clink glasses, you're toasting millennia of human curiosity and connection. If this history sparked your curiosity, subscribe and raise a virtual glass in the comments to your favorite beer moment. Thank you for watching.